Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Thibodeau. I lead our app innovation in AI nationally here in Canada. As part of that job, I help people with their existing or net new applications, custom applications, or the custom integrations between existing applications. Fortunately, I was working on something similar with many different customers, and so the Horton Cloud team and I started talking about the need to maybe bring this into a webinar format because of all of the questions and dialogues around this similar challenge, specifically around customers who may be MuleSoft or may even have other types of integration today, and how to think about where and how they take successful migrations to something that maybe is more efficient, more cost effective, and has a bunch of other benefits to it, which would be the Azure integration services, which is a suite of different types of integration depending on what you're trying to do. So today I'd like to kick it off, and I'll give Derek, Marley, and Tim Bieber the chance to introduce themselves in more detail, but know that Derek is an experienced, seasoned expert with over 25 years of experience, specifically in this space, especially around MuleSoft, which is very valuable. And both of them collectively have experience in helping customers do this type of migration. And so the point of today was to help people understand a little bit about how that works. Or maybe they don't even know what those words mean, and so hopefully help educate on some of that. And then as a follow-up, we've hopefully created an opportunity to follow up and assess where you're at today, or jump right into helping you with the migration. And so another piece of my role, which I like to kind of brag about, is I get to help people get there faster and invest in those specific things. So if after today's session you're interested in potentially assessing where you're at, or taking a step to drive migration, reach back out to the Horton Cloud team, Derek and Tim, and they know how to get in touch with me, and we'll be able to invest in helping you move forward with some action items coming out of today's call if what you see piques your interest. So with that, I'll pass it over to Derek and Tim to give deeper introductions about themselves and kick us off for today, and I'll stick around for any questions on the line and circle back towards the tail end of the presentation. Over to you, Derek.
Perfect.
And Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, appreciate you facilitating this too. So basically, actually move back, Derek. Let's show them our pretty faces to start. So Derek, you'll hear a lot of Derek's experience, but Derek basically brings 25 years plus of integration experience across all of the usual suspect iPaaS and integration platform companies and platforms, specifically MuleSoft. So and myself, I'm growth and strategy director. So basically, I facilitate partnerships, handle scale and growth of our integration company. But to give you a little bit of a backstory and kind of the pedigree that we bring with MuleSoft, our previous company we indirectly sold to Salesforce, which is the owner of MuleSoft. So we've got a lot of experience under the hood of MuleSoft with many years, decades of MuleSoft. So that kind of gives the credibility and the understanding of understanding MuleSoft from under the hood, and also the work that we've been doing over many years now with AIS gives us that unique capability. Derek's also a 3-time certified MuleSoft engineer and architect. So we're excited to kind of kick off, move to the next slide, and I'll let you know a little bit about Horton quickly, and then I'll toss it over to Derek. But excited to kind of give you that path to migrate from MuleSoft to AIS. Our consultancy, we're one of the leading, and frankly, in the Microsoft world, we're one of the only partners that's dedicated solely and specifically to systems integration. We handle client projects from the design, early design, architectural design perspective, shaping your future roadmap and how you'll really just scale your company through integration. And then delivery, we dive in, roll up our sleeves, handle the delivery of projects of building the integrations on AIS. And in the case of what we're going to be talking about today, the migration off of MuleSoft and other iPaaS platforms for that matter. And then we also have a managed arm of the company, and we have managed service. So we're not just designing and building, but we're also maintaining a managed perspective to help those clients along the way. So that's a little bit of background on us. I'll toss it over to Derek, but ahead of that, I mentioned before, most of you guys jumped in. There's a Q&A at the top of the screen. You can hit Q&A if you've got questions now or if you've got questions throughout. I'll stay on the line. I might have some questions or comments. We'll kind of keep this interactive between Derek and I and the audience here. So if you've got any questions, drop them in. I can interrupt Derek and I can field some questions, but then at the end, we'll also have some Q&A. But keep this interactive, ask as many questions as you want. And then Derek and I are available, as Mike mentioned, through either Mike or Derek and I, our emails. I think we've got them at the end, but if you want to write them down, I'm tim@hortoncloud.com and Derek is derek@hortoncloud.com, but happy to answer any questions afterwards as well. So with that, toss it over to you, Derek.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So let's get going. So there's a lot of content here. My approach on this webinar, I gave it some thought on how to do that. So first part, I do want to talk about Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, and it's not going to be a talk specifically around reading a white paper and understanding what that white paper means. And so what I want to do is take a lot of really good guidance that Microsoft gives, but the tangibles, what's the real stuff I can actually get out of this as an implementer, as an architect. I don't want to just talk about it. I want to have Microsoft have this definitive guidance to us, right? And so I should be able to go to their documents and then from there see a link and actually grab the artifact, deploy that artifact and see it come to life. And that's how I judge this. Then I'm going to talk about costing, because I think that it's a critical component of this when we think about ROI. Every time we build an integration, we got to think, well, what is this costing us? What is the return on this investment from the business aspect? So I do want to dig into that. And then the last portion is really tactfully and technically, how do we go after this? How would we migrate an organization off of MuleSoft onto Microsoft for these reasons? So let's get started. The first part of it is this slide here, and you can Google, we have links that we can provide, but the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework is essentially, you can think about when the cloud started to come to life, customers were saying, well, I'm building stuff, but I don't know, I'm not sure if it's done right. I don't know if I've secured it correctly. I don't know. So Microsoft invested a ton of resources, a ton of time and thought leadership in this space, think tank type stuff. But really, from my perspective, what I see from it, I notice when I get in these engagements and we use this as a way to work through it, it's my communication as an architect to talk to the business, to set the goals, to understand what they are. And that's really what this part of it is, getting the planning done. But really, what I want to do is get to ready and adopt. And finally, how do I secure? Which in this world, when we think about integration, everybody talks about in the cloud, and they think, the cloud sounds so wonderful and it sounds so soft and it's beautiful, but really it's not. It's very scary. It's very difficult. And we think about, the hackers and that are in the ecosystems out there now. They're highly motivated and they got nothing but time on their hands to come after your organization and come after your data and hold you ransom, right? So we have to come up with a way that says we're not motivated, highly motivated, and we don't have a lot of time, but we know they are. So let's leverage this opportunity with Microsoft to say, you spend billions of dollars on security every year. How does that fit? And more importantly, from an integration perspective, how does that fit within with me as an architect? So we're going to go through that today. Again, they have motivations when we think about migrate, the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, the migrate component of that, they have theirs. But really, for me, it's the first couple is I want to know that I'm doing this in a very cost-effective way. I think I'm going to want to know that it's, if I'm migrating, I want to know that I've improved my security and compliance. I want to know those things. So really, you're going to see me talk today around these motivations. But again, they'll give you some advice and some guidance on business strategy, and there's wonderful literature out there, like spreadsheets that you fill in, and it'll kind of gauge where you're at. There's a lot of really thick, rich content out there. But to me, it's the proven guidance, right? So again, they're being able to take, I want the tools. So I'm going to show you some of that today. I want the documentation that's relevant and accurate. But most importantly, I want to be advised what the best practice is and not have to go through months and years of learning them just for them to change again. So I want to let Microsoft provide that guidance. And again, pragmatically, I just want the artifacts. I want to be able to take that artifact and deploy it and it works. So we're going to talk about that in their methodology around that. What your organizations from top down should be considering is the notion around governance and how do you manage that in your whole ecosystem. And integration is a part of that, but I want to see it kind of top down, and I do kind of get into that. So kind of the day in the life, if I think about security, and I'm going to kind of, this is where I'm going to kind of look at the two models. I'm going to look at the MuleSoft, the way I would traditionally as an architect approach that. But then I also want to next go from an Azure perspective, how is that approached? So when we think about security concerns, these are the things that folks, the compliance officers, the architects, they would come and say, hey, you know, the subnets should have a network security group attached to them. The IP, you know, it's for, we have to disable IP forwarding on this. And hey, when we deploy a SQL Server to help with those integration, make sure that threat detection is on, right? So there's a lot of just things that come at us as architects, and then we have to make best effort to meet them, of course. But it's, again, within your organization, you only know what you know. And so this approach of how do I learn more, how do I stay abreast of it as an organization, but then finally as an architect. And then we think about things like regulatory compliance. So we got HIPAA. Well, there's privacy rules that need to be enforced. There's security rules that need to be enforced. What happens when there's a breach? And then what is the advice on that? And how can we automate some of that? When I think about Canada, it's around, you know, if I need ISO 27001, which is definitive kind of in your organization around governance, like this is a lot for us to cover off. So what I want to do in the life of a MuleSoft architect is kind of say, it's usually traditionally, we'll approach this kind of a code first perspective. So we have a set of developers, and those developers will go and say, well, I've started to build, I've built this thing, I'm getting ready to deploy it. But then we have to stop and say, have we deployed that over the right ports? You know, did we expose something we shouldn't have from that level? Oh, wait a minute, I did have an FTP requirement in there. Did I deploy SFTP as a mandatory thing, or did I accidentally just deploy an FTP connector? This one's for data solvency. Like if I deploy my artifacts and I'm in Canada and I got data solvency issues around, I can't have my data in the United States or anywhere else in the world. I accidentally deployed that for the last 2 months as I was doing my development in the wrong region. So it's actually been running in the States versus in Canada. That's an issue, right? So this is what I call kind of bottom-upping. So the regulatory compliance team comes, says, have you been following the 27001? Usually the developer is like, I don't know what that means, but I can try to look at it. Do you have any guidance or advice for me to fix that? And this is traditional. This isn't, usually the way this kind of conversation goes from this. And it's really it's just iPaaS that aren't a part of a bigger ecosystem, right? It's usually thought of as something different. It's out on the right. When we have to go talk to the security team, it's usually just, it's not all in one encompassing. So what if we lived in an organization that said environment first? Well, what I would want to see is at the enterprise, we would have the regulatory team come forward and say, hey, we need to follow ISO 27001. Top down. So we're going to apply something to our environment. We're going to force that behavior. Then what we'll traditionally do is say, okay, well, there's network connectivity issues, there's identity management issues that we need to address, but they're going to be different than potentially the compliance and the rules and the security considerations that need to happen at this level. We also need to apply different ones down here. Like I said, no IP, forwarding, anything to do with identity management needs to be well understood. So it's different policies around that need to be applied at this level. But then we look at applications, they have the same, they'll be different. Am I doing a cloud to cloud integration that has different policies and considerations than a cloud to on-prem or on-prem to on-prem, right? They're just all so different. So we would take some of these same policies, apply them into each individual component. But then we say, okay, finally, we have some developers and they're ready to go. But really what happens if we take this top-down approach is maybe you have a set of developers doing back office integrations. Well, they realize that it's enforced, right? So it's a provisioned environment for that developer to do development for back office integrations. It's a provisioned and ready environment for invoice integrations to actually be developed. But they can't pick the wrong port because we've enforced it all the way down. Maybe it was a part of some compliance, or it's just a security consideration that your organization wants to enforce. They realize, hey, wait a minute, from a resource perspective, I can't deploy this in the wrong region. There's only one region available to me. So I'm constrained at that level. And lastly, it just would have a policy that says you're not allowed to use FTP. So when I think about it, this one I call top down, and the other diagram I showed was more bottom up. So in the cloud adoption framework, this is starting to flirt with some of their nomenclature, right? So at this level, this is your Azure tenant. This is where usually it's connected to Active Directory, and this is where your RBAC and security controls are applied at this level. And at each one of these other levels, you can have many along this way, but they call them management groups. And again, this is management group is also where you would apply things like your policies and RBAC controls, so security policies and user management at management groups. So I can apply them. So you can see I'm already starting to see where I can start applying some of these constraints in place. The last notion of this is called the landing zone. So this is kind of a pre-built environment that it falls out, right? So it's usually an application workload where you're saying, hey, I like to delineate my back office integrations at one. Invoicing is a big one. It's got a lot of integrations there. So that's a unit of work, an application workload that I like to have all sitting in its own landing zone. And really at this level, they're just called subscriptions. So it's an Azure subscription that you would thread up and call back office integrations, a subscription called invoice integrations. And at this level, we can also apply RBAC access controls, policies, and cost management and alerting on costing, budgets on costing. So it's really well thought out top down. But most importantly in this world is we want all this automated, right? So this is where I say this becomes pragmatic. So when I go and look at how to build a landing zone for migration, I can go to the link in Microsoft, go landing zones, and they have a prescribed way to build a migration landing zone that has the policies, has the RBAC controls already set up for me. And I literally can grab that artifact and deploy it and see that environment, that pre-built environment come to life. But the good part about this is once we get those and we tweak them for our organization, those audit policies, they just get applied, right? So I don't have to give them, if I pick up another regulatory compliance that I want to follow, I can, again, drop it into my Azure policy and get it applied, and it'll trickle down at whatever part I put it in, but maybe back office gets its own new policy. I can go download it from Microsoft's GitHub, linked from their website, and essentially go through it. It's a JSON file that I can grab, that I can modify and apply, right? But what we want to do that is through automation. So when I think about comparing this model, which is, again, when we think about the web is going to the cloud, sounds soft and easy, but it's scary. So how do we make sure we have all the right things in to make it less scary? And I do want to follow this. So when I would do a MuleSoft project, these are some of the things I felt like I couldn't achieve. I had to try to figure out how to do some of these compliance things in maybe the API manager side of it, but not really. It's best behaviors versus constrained policies that just constrain the environment. And when we go, again, I can go to their website, I see all of these, and there's 1,000 of them, right? And if you go to GitHub, there's community-driven set that they found that helped in their organization. So I can just essentially download it, apply it, and I become, and there's two ways they can do it. You can do like a hard, it can't happen, or you can have ones that's more advisory. So it says, it's a graph that shows you've hit, 30 out of your 60 compliant policies that needed to be applied in that environment.
Hey, Derek, before you move on, or I'll finish this slide, sorry, and then just want to backtrack to the last one.
Yeah, so just keep in mind, so this to me, when I think about, I go into an organization, I want to help them with their integrations. If somebody came to me and said, how would you achieve HIPAA inside my integrations, inside MuleSoft, I'd be a little hard pressed I would go and download documents and try to understand it. When I talk to this same question inside a Microsoft environment and in the notion of a landing zone, an integration landing zone, a pre-built environment that I know I'm going to do my invoicing integrations in, I can just take this, apply it to the environment, and now I just say, here is the Microsoft compliance on HIPAA, and I provide that to them. So it really does help top down all the way from the policy makers all the way down to the implementers. So I think that's pretty important. Yes, Tim.
Move back one slide, because I think
Sure.
one really important point to note is that Microsoft, investing in the Microsoft ecosystem, it's a full ecosystem, and the where they're championing the cloud adoption framework for the entire cloud adoption world. This is powerful IP that you're able to leverage. So can you show us here, like based on this being part of this cloud adoption framework, show us the difference in what MuleSoft offers in this environment first, these layers. What does MuleSoft have to offer? We don't want to necessarily throw MuleSoft under the bus, but we really want to compare the differences of Azure's very sophisticated integration environment underneath the cloud adoption framework, which is just this bigger ecosystem that you've invested into and you have capability. So on this slide,
Sure.
Where is MuleSoft here?
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, Tim, is I don't want to, it's sophisticated, it's very comprehensive. But to get started in this ecosystem, we can and if you take the artifacts from Microsoft and you try to apply it to environment, you really can create apples to apples to a MuleSoft. So it doesn't have to be very sophisticated, very complex layouts of management groups to landing zones. It really, from a Azure perspective, it's this triangle, right? So, or it's from a MuleSoft perspective, here's MuleSoft, right? And you can apply, it has toolings in it. It's got user access controls in it. It's an application. And then inside that, you would have flows, right? So integration flows that get deployed. So many back office integrations get deployed into MuleSoft. And when it comes to things like policy, it's difficult. There's not something I apply at this level and see it trickle down. Again, I think it's bottom up. The developer has to go figure out what compliance they need to follow and build that into their integrations, and then deploy it. So it's really this triangle. What you get if you started greenfield development inside Azure is you essentially take that artifact, you apply it, and you can create an integration landing zone that has a perspective that says, this should be here. These are the controls that need to be in place. And here's and then you create a landing zone off that. So it's very clean on how it comes about. And then each time you just decide what's the granularity. I could have delineated, in this case, I'm delineating more on capability, but it could have been like marketing. It could have been finance. It's however you see it in your organization you want to delineate it. So it's very flexible, and it's not like I have to eat the whole thing all at once. It's very much laid out to allow you for the maximum amount of flexibility long term. That's really what it's about, without kind of stepping on your own toes. And that's the advice, right? The definitive guidance for them is we want to make sure that you can always expand and take on new projects. It's the notion of, it used to be big eating small organizations, right? The big ones would eat the small. Now it's really the fast eat the slow, right? So what we want to make sure is that we can continue to innovate, get ROI, and do digital transformations quickly. So that's really what that's about.
Yeah, cool.
I'll just quickly go through this. When you go through their literature, you're going to see stuff like this. So, they'll have their corporate landing zones as one advice that you can go down. Maybe you're bringing in a CRM, so you create one. Again, the policies get applied at this level. The tooling that you provision to be allowed in there, the network that's isolated. And then this is where I'm talking more in the integration. They're just pre-built environments, right? I can create as many as I want and have developers jump in and start working on, say, the finance integrations. So this is what you'll see from a graphics perspective. The other one that I just want to touch on quickly is inside Azure with these landing zones, what they're trying to do is get you to think of it as a blueprint, or in the new world deployment stacks, where they're saying, I can take a template that says, here's the components I want: logic apps, and I want API manager. And those are the tools that developer is allowed to use in that environment. Here's all the policies that they're going to have to be constrained by, which I've already talked about. And really what you do is you put them together and it runs automation, and it just creates that pre-built environment like we talked about here. It just create it. So in this case, it would only have logic apps available and API manager available if that was your architecture, and it applied all the right policies. So automation, automation, automation. You never want to kind of do this without it. I'll just quickly fly through this one. 5 disciplines of cloud governance. This is where Microsoft says, I want to provide guidance on all of these things. We talked about security and applying those policies. We've got the consistency around resource. Again, I only want them to use logic apps, and maybe there's a function that I want them to have in that environment, and then API manager or not. Identity management, and then all kinds of things, considerations around deployments. But really, again, being pragmatic, I'm greedy. I want to know what I get out of it as the architect and the implementer. I care that there's tools that make all of these things real, and this is it, right? Like Azure has a plethora of these in each category. So it's kind of like on many levels in your organization, different tooling will match what they're looking for around Azure policy. And you can see Azure policies in each one of these categories. Blueprints, are pervasive throughout it, or deployment stacks that they're called now. So these tools are rich, they're downloadable, they're available to you. Now, just moving on in interest of time, I did want to talk on, I think about an ROI, return on investment, in my integrations. So I always want to know what it's going to cost and what the business can realize out of it. So what I traditionally see, and what I've done is I've picked just a simple standard use case. In MuleSoft licensing world, they call it a 2x4, where you get 2 production vCores, and we'll delineate what that means down here. And then you get a 4-core to like a dev and a QA, however you want to do your lower environments. And this is common. This is a lot of organizations start with this model. This is traditionally what they'll sell, which fits kind of a grow model. But when I think about this, here's what happens in my mind's eye, because I'm always about, I don't want my licensing structure to constrain my architecture decisions. And you'll see that it happens immediately. If I have 2 production vCores, I got to think about how I'm going to use those. And the way, when you build an integration, I pick up a file, I transform that file, and I maybe store the data into a database. I update the database with that record. So I think I'm a developer. I go to my PC and I start developing my flow, my MuleSoft flow, and I build it. And there really isn't a question around, well, how much CPU is it using? What type of memory utilization is it using? We usually give it to the deployment team, and they have to deal with now I've code completed on my 0.1 well, I think my 1.1 vCore. And it can happen. Like, it's about a 512 meg memory box that they deploy that on AWS. Which is great, works for a lot of use cases. But maybe the developer was just okay with the way they developed it. Maybe they, instead of streaming that file, they loaded the whole file into memory and then started processing the file. And when it goes to deploy, the first run, it blows up. Not great. So now I got to think, oh, I got to go to a 1 gig memory. And that's usually what happens, right? We just take the lowest barrier and we knock it down by just doubling it. So we get a bigger box, it happens, it works. But then you realize, ooh, the pricing file that they send from one of my vendors, it's traditionally can be handled by this 0.1 or 0.2, but maybe once a year they give me a full load of all the pricing records and I run it through. Well, logic tells me I can just go to a 0.3 and then a 0.4 and a 0.5, but that's not true inside MuleSoft ecosystem. What they do is they go 0.1, 0.2, and then you jump immediately to a 1 vCore. So when you start to look at these vCore utilization, it's promising. It has a little bit of a solution, and then it kind of gets a little bit wonky. And when I have to make a decision to either tell the developer to rewrite it or I just utilize 1 full vCore. So not very elastic, right? And what I wanted to talk about here is more around it's fixed. So when you assign a 0.2 vCore, it can't be like, hey, Monday through Thursday, use a 0.1 because I know that the large file's coming on Friday and then bump it. That's not a thing. You essentially go for peak usage. And this is big in organizations that maybe have Boxing Day sales online and some big integration that's quiet traditionally all throughout the year or all throughout the week or all throughout the month. And then they get a spike in because it needs to handle something bigger. You're paying for peak usage. So again, if it took one vCore to hit this, but it was 0.1 down all the way through here, it doesn't matter. You're paying for the one vCore because you have to assign it ahead of time. Maybe the last consideration when you're thinking about this pricing model is you always have to keep capacity because of this notion, like that file. We didn't know that the customer in December was going to send us a big file. So if you had utilized all of your 2 vCores and come November, they send a large file and it falls over, you can't go from 0.1 to 0.2 because you don't have any left. So just keep in mind that it's not very elastic. Whereas Azure, AWS, Google, they're all moving towards pay for what you use, right? So in this model, it can be quiet and you're only paying for how many times that thing ran. And then, Boxing Day is when you want it to peak, so it can scale out and scale up depending on your requirement. And you only pay for that and it goes back quiet on January. So now January back to Boxing Day, it's quiet all year. So it's very elastic, right? And I can handle the performance. It's not a developer consideration. I tell the services to scale that way based off my requirements. What we talk about with organizations in that 2x4 licensing is traditionally it's about 250,000 US to get kind of started. Discounts for sure. I don't want to say there isn't. But if you go to the Azure calculator and you say I'm going to replace Azure flows with a Logic app integrations with API manager in front, like it's easy to go through the calculator, and this is what you're going to see. And we've seen this happen where we have an organization that has migrated and seen this type of reduction. That's 90%, right? That's not even 80. But we want to manage the expectation. Of course, you're going to have different usages and it's just a different pricing model. But this is traditionally what you're going to see in type like scales of reduction in costing. Like it's very, very accurate.
So if you were to kind of compare this, sort of summarize, if you were to compare apples to apples, you're really talking about on average a $250,000 annual fee versus a $25,000 annual consumption fee. So a tenth. And in a lot of cases, we've seen organizations that are spending far more than 250,000 and equivalent AIS services are running substantially lower than 25,000. So, whether that's 80 to 90%, it's compelling. And this is the reason why we're having this conversation in this webinar right now, is to give people, this is obviously the why. We're kind of in the why portion of the presentation, why you would want to switch, why you're here listening to this. And now we kind of segue into the how you can switch now that you know why you want to switch. And I think to reinforce that point, Derek, to add another vCore, so you get 2 in the base plan. To add another vCore, how much are you talking?
Yeah, I think it's roughly about 25K to get a third vCore per. Whereas you're right, Tim, if here, like this 25,000, if I add another integration that's, again, picking up a file transformer, sticking to days, it'll move from 25,000 to 25,100, right? Like
yeah.
The scales of that. And I always talk about ROI and ROE, right? Return on investment and return on effort. Because if I'm telling a developer to go fix stuff, that's effort, right? Like, so we have to make our decisions that way. So you're right. It's the scales, even after you get going with the 2x4, like it's like a step function each time you go back to MuleSoft and say, I would like to start using EDI. Well, it's a step function pricing wise. You're again paying like a license versus I'm just adding another component to my integration and I should just see a couple $100 added to my bill.
Yeah. So these are extremely compelling reasons why you would want to be migrating over to AIS.
So I'll kind of get into how does it compare, right? That's probably a lot of people are like, sounds great. I want to save money. but what does the tooling look like? It's very comparable in that's what this is inside Azure Integration Services. They have this notion of integration environment, which surfaces kind of per integration area if you want. But you have the capability adding API manager, so very sophisticated throttling, rate limiting, caching, data transformations in this layer. Like, it's very powerful. This is external APIs, internal APIs, has the full developer experience for surfacing the integrations in your organization, for reusability. It's all there. Not undifferent that you would notice inside MuleSoft, and arguably a little bit more powerful because essentially MuleSoft's just taking AWS's API management and putting a user interface over it, hiding a lot of the complexities. But when you forgo some of those complexities, you're forgoing capability as well. So I don't like that as an architect. Logic apps would be synonymous to MuleSoft flows. Logic apps have all 1,000 connectors plus connectors to all the sophisticated ERPs and cloud systems, all drag and drop, drag out inline coding if you wish. At that point, inline functions, if you will. Functions are kind of a capability that MuleSoft just doesn't have, like to step out and say, I want to put all this in a succinct service that is reusable by many things, but it's literally, I want to bang out some C# code or Java code. It's polyglot that way. You can pick the language that you want to build it in and deploy it as an artifact in your network, almost like just an API that you just want to put out. And it's kind of just, it allows this logic app it's all drop down. I can, in my flow, go drop down, select the function, call the function, get the response. So it's a little bit more capability, a lot more powerful. Anypoint MQ, they have service bus, event grid, event hub. They're all sophisticated, very powerful. Again, pay for what you use models versus I have to go to MuleSoft and ask them for how much is my license for Anypoint MQ. Data Factory is all around ETL, large. Again, when we think about vCores, if I'm picking up large amounts of data and moving large amounts of data, usually in the MuleSoft ecosystem, you have to step out of bounds and go somewhere else anyway for large data capabilities. Whereas in the Azure space, it's just a landing zone that you're provisioning that capability in. I want to add EDI, and you'll see I have a slide that kind of pulls it all together, but I can just add this component and start doing EDI inside my integration right away. I obviously have access. This is starting to step outside of Azure Integration Services, but all of these capabilities, I need a database. In MuleSoft, you don't have a database that you can leverage to do item potency type checks, or I need storage. I need to drop a large file and do a baggage claim pattern, design pattern in my API development methodology. And I don't have somewhere. So I'm stepping out of bounds. I got to go to AWS. I've got to go to Azure. I got to go to Google anyway. Virtual machines, if that comes up. And obviously the new world around machine learning, AI, it's all capability that's right in there. But ultimately, the end one that this one hangs for me, is this notion of logging and analytics, and it covers all of these. So your whole ecosystem inside Microsoft you see all of that, your methodology around logging and aggregation and alerting and notifications, all of these components all feed into the same logging and alerting mechanism. So I really like that. It's kind of complete. Otherwise, in the MuleSoft project, I bet you 50% of our MuleSoft implementations are we take the logs and we push them somewhere else to be analyzed and retained for retention. And so you're already stepping out of bounds for that as well.
So go back there, Derek. You did a good job answering a question that came in from Kanish, specifically on mapping MuleSoft components to the equivalent AIS components. So I hope that answered the question there. And then also really that there's so many components specifically on the AI front, databasing, data factory front that MuleSoft just doesn't have that capability.
Yeah. So I'm going to fly through this, and obviously this talk is very much around MuleSoft migration. So the 3-layered architecture is very predominant in there. It's just a design pattern in integration patterns booklet. And so really, I'll quickly go through it. System level APIs are to access and surface data from all your disparate systems. Doesn't matter if it's a file coming, it doesn't matter if it's a database or a cloud application. We want to surface those applications in a very consistent way. Maybe throughout this one is it returns result sets, but we don't want in the process layer, experience level, or clients up here coming and have to know what a result set is. So we normalize and we surface the data. Processing layers are simply about this is where your business processes live for usability. So when I want to create a work order, this is where I would have work order services that help me work with work orders. An experience level is usually every client that wants to talk, you would create an experience level API so that they can come in and actually interact with these systems. Really the benefit of this decoupling, and you can read more around 3-layered architecture, but it's really to create this safe zone for you to if you want to switch out your CRM, maybe you're going from Salesforce CRM to Dynamics 365 CRM, this is where we want you to protect all of these clients. You can have hundreds of clients coming in and trying to access your data through the web, through on-prem, but we want to be able to change, right? So we don't want to, every time we change something, have to come back to all those clients, tell them to change. So we don't want that. So it gives us flexibility, gives us a safe zone to work within. And I'll just fly through this. We have a migration strategy, and we'll go through that. It follows the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Migrate strategy, which they talk a lot about plan, which is great. Readiness, how do we create those landing zones? How do we prepare the environments from governance perspective? And then we go through each integration, kind of looping through each integration and migrating from MuleSoft to AIS, which I'll talk about next. I can share this slide if anybody's interested, or these slides, and there's links to all of the stuff that we follow within there. And then lastly, obviously, we do knowledge transfer to clients so that they can maintain and manage, or we have Horton Care. It's a little plug for us. We manage integrations so that we keep all of security in mind. We keep all of the upgrades happening as part of our care, and ultimately allow operational management to fall on our shoulders versus the client. In our methodology, just 15 minutes to get through the next few slides. So there's a lot here. So I'll just tell you about our methodology. It's really broken into two, we call them migration categories that match up against the adoption framework migrate strategy, which is really, we call it a technology migration. We got to deal with the technology, and then we got to talk about the business processes. Like integrations are all about when a business process covers 1, 2, 3 systems, right? So we want to understand what that business process and migrate them in a safe manner. This is a migration, so it's pretty straightforward. And so what we do is we attack API management first, because it really gives us the maximum amount of flexibility as we migrate. If we can interject API management at the layers, then it allows us to change everything underneath it, doing canary testing 80/20. So it's going to hit the old system, get the new system. It's if something goes wrong, we go to API manager, say stop going to the new system because we got to make some changes. Okay, it's back online. Let's do canary testing. It just gives us the flexibility. And really what that is we take those RAML files that are MuleSoft and we migrate them to Open API. A lot of organizations have already gone Open API inside MuleSoft, so it's just a cutover, and we surface those APIs that allow all the clients to come in. Reasons why we do it is we know that those clients at the top, they're not going to be eager to change really fast. So you can imagine we keep these ones going for that client to hit them, but we've given them the new URL, we give them their keys so they can actually start migrating this. So it takes time. So that's why we want to start this one early. It gives them time to change. Right, so we just give a deadline over the next 3 months. If you can change that URL, it just allows us to change, and now all the clients are ready for our changes underneath. But it gives us a period of time that we're safe. Again, it creates the abstraction, allows us to do the canary testing, and then a real slick way to roll back strategy. The tasks are we take those RAMLs, we move them over. We update all the MuleSoft experience and process configurations to call APIM URLs. So we're essentially decommissioning. If you're using MuleSoft API Manager, then we're decommissioning that one in a way and just starting to surface the Microsoft API Manager. And then we make requests to all the clients for that to start using the new. So we'd probably go through some type of notification period where we let them know that they need to migrate to the new URLs.
Derek, there's a question that came in pertaining to time. So this person's asking specifically on the timeline when their license is up for renewal. How far back would you typically recommend starting this timeline to give enough time so it's not so rushed and you don't have to re-up another 1 or 2 or 5 year license with MuleSoft?
Yeah, that key date is the key date. Nobody wants to re-up, right? Microsoft or MuleSoft's licensing is, you traditionally pay a 3 or 5 year term, right? And we don't want customers having to go back to MuleSoft and say, can I get a 1 year license, right?
Pay through the nose for that.
Yeah. So what we want to do is we usually back it off. We usually give ourselves a window of time that we say we want to be migrated by, that gives you a comfort level of 3 months and 6 months and whatever the comfort zone you need to. We work with you with that. So we've migrated somebody over a 2 year period. We've done them in 6 month periods, and we've done them in 3 month periods, depending on the complexity of all their integrations. But we work with that as a managed thing. We appreciate that migrating integrations is not straightforward. It takes care, right? And so we work with you on that. So we'll pick a date that says we want to give you 3 months of comfort and 3 months of running it and making sure that we have migrated everything and it's working and performing better than it was before, right? So I hope that helps. Next, we want to go through the experience layer, because we traditionally think they're pretty straightforward, right? So the experience layers is usually calling a business process, getting a result set, and then transforming it for mobile, like a JSON response. Or this client over here could be wanting SOAP responses or a flat file. So these are pretty straightforward. So we like to expose these and get them working right away. Timers, so we would move from a MuleSoft event timer to a logic app timer, and it just starts to surface it. You're going to see with logic apps, it's beautiful in the way it surfaces data. In MuleSoft, it's kind of hidden from you, right? The executions happen. If you want to see what's happening, you're probably going to work with Java loggers really intimately and categorize them correctly and log the detail that you want so you can see it moving through your processes. Logic apps, each step, you can click on it after and run and see the successful and failure steps, and it's like truly visible. But I can also see the input data, the JSON that came in, and what that step responded in JSON out at every step. So it's from an operations perspective, we try to surface those pretty quick because they're pretty amazing at what they do. We see the customer's requests come in, and we get to see the result set coming back. So it helps us operationally like immediately. So we really like attacking those ones. So we just essentially move all those flows over, decommission. Well, we do a kind of canary testing. So we keep some requests going to the old, some going to the new, and then over time we just move the percentages over to the new until we say we're comfortable, it's performing, it has no issues. So we just stop calling the other. Keep it running because you've already paid for your licenses. Let's keep it there for some emergency, but don't really need it. And then we are following the API manager approach, API-led development approach. So we are updating the routes with API endpoints and having them go through the logic app steps so we can visualize immediately. So we get a lot of benefits that way. Kind of the third effort is we go after the system APIs, because synonymous to the way we said up here, it's pretty straightforward to know, transform this data and give it back in JSON, transform that data, give it back in SOAP. But here it's similar. We already know the queries that are being ran. We know the REST URLs and the request bodies and the response bodies that need to come back from these systems, databases, cloud applications. So they're pretty straightforward. You can pretty much hand that off to a developer and say, you are building the Salesforce system level API. And then once we complete that, we update the APIM manager to now say, when this service in the process calls it, it just goes over to the new one. And it does the canary. So it'll call this one, then it calls this one, and calls this one. And then eventually it'll just call this one. And we kind of turn them all gray and we say it's been decommissioned. So decommissioned, decommissioned. In that, really, it's the same concept. We're just trying to migrate things. We're going to improve. So we're going to involve like Azure Key Vault at this point, secured way of storing that data in a central service versus in properties files and embedded deep inside a MuleSoft flow. We're going to surface it up to a service, like a cloud service that is what it's designed for. We're going to do the canary testing, and then we're going to decommission it. And then last, we move the business processes over. And this is the one that takes a little bit more care. This is usually when we would have some level of business acceptance testing happening. We've migrated, we've done our best. We're pretty confident because of our testing. But we do want them at this point to be engaged and saying we are cutting over invoicing. So beyond, help us do some testing on invoicing, because on next Monday or next month, we're flipping it over. And they're now on board with the change. So we're doing a little bit of change management in this process as well. Let's skip that one, interest time. I threw this one in this morning because I thought it was important. And a lot of organizations still have to deal with legacy EDI, and they don't really have an answer, or they're really thinking of it distinct. Like they think, I have integration and I have my B2Bs. And usually it's a different team, it's a different skill set, it's a different thing to think about. What I encourage you to do inside Azure Integration Services, it's one and the same, right? So when I talked about experience layers and having web applications come in EDI world, Microsoft has just Azure integration account, it's called. So you can go, it's just a component you drag out, and you start putting in your data transformations for EDI, X10, you put in your trading partner certificates inside it. And the way it surfaces it's just a logic app. So the same developer who's building that mobile application interface can now do EDI. It's drag and drop, low code development environment. It's the tool they know, it's the language they know. It does a really good job. So I just want to share that one. And then this is the last slide. Maybe I'll cut this one short a bit, but really think about monitoring. It's a big one. Microsoft does a good job to surface it. Cusco queries that produce alerting dashboards. It really does, and it crosses not just integration, but your whole ecosystem. So it's something to consider. DevOps, we don't touch anything with a company unless they buy into the DevOps culture, that we can't be innovative. We can't do it in a consistent way. We can't prove that something's been done correctly unless we incorporate something like DevOps. Azure DevOps is our tool that we utilize a lot. Terraform is another one. Bicep scripts that we leverage from the Microsoft repositories. The other one is just when we think about security, we're embedding, a lot of organizations are going to Active Directory. Obviously, they have a new name, but really thinking that is my strategy around identity management and provisioning usage or access. But the last one is we're incorporating things like Sentinel. So Sentinel is like a very sophisticated threat detection, threat prevention mechanism, right? So they do it's a full product suite on its own. But what we're doing is encompassing that in our integrations, where we're emitting the data that Sentinel needs to start to discover and detect anomalies. And so it's just something to consider there. Now that was a lot.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
So we did open it up to questions. Fire your questions in the Q&A chat. There is one that just came in here from Sean just now, actually, related to the three-layered architecture and the system process experience layer. Does Microsoft have an automated migration analyzer that takes the MuleSoft system process experience layers and creates an Azure system process experience layers? Is anything there that's automated that you know of?
No. So inside Microsoft, no, there's nothing that's been developed to kind of help with that. Inside Horton, as a part of our professional services, obviously, we don't want to hand-bomb every integration. When we inside MuleSoft, there's data weave. It's proprietary languages. It's a good language on its own, but it's a different way of thinking. It's a functional language, so you have to be in the functional mindset. So we have things that help us migrate from those into code, and that runs inside Azure. So it's kind of being who we are, being the MuleSoft team that we've been doing for 10 years. We have some knowledge there, of course. And we're in the Azure, so we're able to bridge that gap. So we're really focused on that. And that's really how we offer migration services, right? We want to make sure that we're optimizing as well. But I don't think, to your question, I don't think Microsoft has anything like an opinionated view on how to do that.
Yeah, there's so much intricacy that's associated with it. But anyway, Sean, that's a somewhat of an answer there. I'll fire into the chat right here for you to email Derek directly. But for anybody that's here, if you've got any questions that you want to fire over to Derek, Derek at hortoncloud.com.
It's DEREK.
Perfect. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I think as we kicked off at the beginning, if you've got questions, or a key component as a next step would be to assess where you're at today. As you saw, there's like a whole bunch of different directions that you can be going, but all of it starts with understanding what your current state is and where you're intending to go. And so whether that's you're ready to migrate, or whether you need to assess how to approach this, make sure you contact the Horton Cloud team. Tim and Derek will help scope that out and figure out where Microsoft can help lean in and invest to help you on that journey.
Yeah, we're happy to field questions, help anybody out. But yeah, appreciate you having us. And again, if there's any questions, Derek's probably your better guy to fire questions to directly. Derek, DEREK at hortoncloud.com. And then we'll get this deck out to you as well. And then if there's any other follow-up questions once you get the deck, yeah, feel free to fire us a note.
All right. Fantastic.
Perfect. All right. Appreciate everyone's time. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.